Mr. Huizar.
Thank you, Mr. President. And good morning, everyone. I'm honored to be here today with my colleague, Councilmember Gilbert Cedillo, native of Boyle Heights, in making a special recognition to Abel Salas and his Brooklyn and Boyle magazine on the issue that reminds us all of the 44th anniversary of the Chicano Moratorium rally in East LA and the death of Los Angeles Times journalist Ruben Salazar. Ruben Salazar was a journalist who shed light on many issues of his time, particularly when he was covering the Chicano Moratorium rally, a rally that was protesting the inordinate number of African American and Latinos who were being recruited to fight in the Vietnam War. It was issues like that that he brought to the forefront when the mainstream media wasn't covering these issues. But that rally actually turned out violent, with clashes between sheriff's deputies and protesters, including many innocent people were caught up in a bad situation. And Ruben Salazar was one of those people who, he was there as a journalist, later went into a bar, and it has never been cleared up as to what actually happened next when sheriffs rushed into the bar and Ruben Salazar remained dead on the floor. But one thing remains certain, even though that his death has never been cleared up, is that 44 years later, he was taken from us. We still remember the many actions that took place in this rally, and remember the life of Ruben Salazar as an inspiration for many of us to continue the struggle for justice and equality in this great country. Ruben Salazar was actually born in Juarez, Mexico, and he became a voice for the voiceless and a heroic figure when many of us as Latinos needed one. And he has inspired successive generations of Mexican American journalists, writers, and artists throughout Los Angeles and the rest of the nation. And his passing helped to bring to life the Chicano movement and the magazine that we're honoring here today, Brooklyn and Boyle, a print and online magazine dedicated to art and life in Boyle Heights and beyond, and has made it its mission in this issue to honor Salazar and the moratorium. It was established in 2008 and has sought to highlight the beauty and preeminence of the rich cultural expressions that have long since identified the greater East Side of Los Angeles as a nexus for creativity and artistic exploration. I want to thank Abel for doing this issue. I want to thank Abel and all his crew for putting forward this type of magazine, which really touches upon local issues in a way that the local community can understand. And so with that, I am honored, along with my colleague Gilbert Cedillo, to honor Brooklyn and Boyle and Abel for this issue and for all the other issues he puts out to inform our community. So with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Gilbert Cedillo. Gilbert.
So today, it's hard to imagine, as we talk about Hispanic Heritage Month, with El Grito is a few days away, it's hard to imagine that Latinos were a minority in this city. And so what Jose talks about is that in 1970, Latinos were a mere 5% of the population. Imagine that, a mere 5% of the population. And yet at that time, they were 20%, Tom, 20% of the fatalities in Vietnam. And so it was that overrepresentation of Latinos as the fatalities in Vietnam, as those at the front line of our war in Vietnam, that outraged Latinos here in the city. As young Mexican Americans, we called ourselves Chicanos during that time period. I had just finished 6 weeks at Upward Bound, where I was mentored by future leaders like Antonio Hernandez, future leader of MALDEF, Samuel Paz, the future appointee of Clinton to the appeals court, Maria Elena Yepes, and Luis Garza, who is leading the efforts to recover our treasures, those created by the great artist Siqueiros here at El Pueblo. Those were my counselors that summer of 1970. I just finished 6 weeks there at Upward Bound and left there with a great sense of identity and ethnic pride, as were many of the young people who were involved in these efforts. Boyle Heights was different then. It was very diverse, ethnically diverse. There still were Jews around Brooklyn, Russians on Russian Hill, Japanese Americans around First Street, African Americans around Evergreen. It was an incredibly diverse community, much different than it is today. And it was an exciting community. It was one of great optimism and a great sense of hope. And so that summer, many of us were involved in these efforts called the Chicano Moratorium, the efforts of Chicanos to stop the war and to stop the over-presence of Chicanos as the fatalities of that war. And so we organized a march. It was to march from Belvedere Park down 3rd Street across Atlantic, turn right on Whittier, and then make it to then what was called Laguna Park. And we did that so peacefully. We did so peacefully that we even incorporated an entire wedding and the wedding party into the march. People came throughout the entire Southwest and throughout the country to participate. And it was very exciting as you got there. Music was playing, dancers were dancing, and the speeches were just beginning. Unfortunately, there was a disruption that served as a premise for that gathering of 25,000 people, then at that time the largest gathering of Mexican Americans in a rally for social justice. And that rally was attacked by the Sheriff's Department. And then that turned into social unrest along Whittier Boulevard, the main business corridor, and people began to burn buildings and loot buildings. As Jose has mentioned, at the end of that corridor, at a bar called the Silver Dollar, Ruben Salazar sat there talking about what took place that day, the success of the march, and then the clamoring that was taking place outside on the street. And for reasons unknown to many, projectiles were shot into the bar, and Mr. Salazar was assassinated. Mr. Salazar had been the voice of integration, of social justice, of civic participation for Latinos. This was not an activist, this was not a young college student, but this was an established journalism who had won awards for his coverage of the war in Vietnam, for his coverage of the protests in 1968 at the Olympics in Mexico City, who had won awards for his coverage of Mexican Americans as they attempted to integrate into the mainstream of American society. And yet this voice and this man was assassinated on that day. We are here today to honor him and to honor those who advocated for social justice for Mexican Americans during that time period. And we do so by focusing on a magazine called Brooklyn Boyle. Before it was Chavez Avenue, it was Brooklyn Avenue. And many of the streets in Boyle Heights acknowledge the origins of the community: St. Louis, Chicago, New York, and Brooklyn. And so Brooklyn was the vibrant street and where we had many of our stores, and it was kind of the center of Boyle Heights. And so this magazine is called Brooklyn Boyle. We're here to honor it. It honors our tradition and our history of an independent press that covers the news with a purpose towards finding justice. And so we're very happy to be here with Abed Salas, who runs Brooklyn Boyle, and we're very happy to be here to honor those who participated in the Chicano Moratorium and the March of August 29th, 44 years ago. And I remember being there. Supervisor Gloria Molina was one of the activists. Congressman Esteban Roybal was one of the activists. Bert Corona was at the podium at the time the march was being attacked. It was a historic day, to say the least. And with that, we're happy to be here and honor Abed Salas for his great work. Come forward. There you go. And so with that, this city honors our history and our tradition and our future with Brooklyn and Boyle.
Mr. Cedillo, I'd like to defer to Mr. Labange at this time, and Mr. Huizar, Mr. Laban.
Yeah, Mr. Cedillo, very good point to remember Ruben Salazar 43 years ago, a different time, and the drive. There's a tremendous documentary, as you know, which I think we should find and make available for all the members so that you could see that history. To the publishers, which are so important about community. Los Angeles is you spoke about the diversity in the previous presentation, the Guatemalan people, largest city outside of Guatemala, Los Angeles, largest Korean city outside of Korea, Los Angeles, et cetera, et cetera. I believe 38 countries are the largest. But the neighborhoods and the diversity of the neighborhoods are what gives us the strength and the people that are there. So the publishers, I congratulate you and thank you. I know Mr. Huizar, I knew about Brooklyn Avenue before, and the Macy Street Bridge, which they now call the Cesar Chavez Bridge. Yes. It really is still the Macy Street Bridge because the guy who gets the bridge named first, but that's another story. God bless Cesar Chavez. God bless Sal Castro, who was such a great one at Lincoln High School, where I had my best game for Marshall High, but he fought so hard that we got New Wilson High School. And so many things happened because of that movement, because people stood up and said, we want a better way. And there's nothing like a local magazine that highlights this area. Do a feature on Sister Jenny out at Puente Learning Center. Yes. She's very special. Yes. Okay. Thank you all. Congratulations. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Labange.
Good morning, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to be here. I'm never going to be able to fill shoes the size of Ruben Salazar's, but we can all do our part. I was still in primary school when he was taken away. I remember taking an art history class, I think the first ever Chicano art history class taught in this country under Dr. Ramon Favela at the University of Texas. And the first day of class, he presented us with a reader, and I knew who Ruben Salazar was, but had never read anything he'd written. And the first essay in this reader, which was really an introduction to art and art history, was titled, Who is a Chicano and What do the Chicanos Want? And I can remember being so impressed that I made a decision then that I would spend the rest of my life trying to learn how to be a better writer, a communicator, and bring communities together, honor the history that we're honoring here today. All those people who marched the long marches and raised their voices to make the world and the society a better place. I want to thank Jose Huizar and Gil Cedillo, two older brothers of mine that I'm extremely proud to be friends with, as well as a constituent. Although I have an office in Boyle Heights, we call the forgotten corner of Boyle Heights and Hazard. You guys are doing great work, and I'm just so happy and honored to be here. I want to introduce Natalie Gonzalez, who's worked with me for over a year, and Mr. Thomas Varela, a writer who has followed his destiny, and now ours are linked. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Abel. Thank you for your work. And you said Gil and I are two older brothers. For the record, he's the oldest brother. I'm your older brother, but he's the oldest. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you and congratulations.